Hi guys and girls. Tonight we wander somewhere older than time and softer than dreams, into the gentle murmur of history, where the whisper of one caveman's grunt may echo all the way to a Wall Street boardroom. Before ATMs, before piggy banks, before even the humble pocket, humanity had a problem: how to keep track of who owed whom a mammoth leg. So snuggle in, adjust your metaphorical loincloth, and if your thumbs aren't too tired, tap that like button before your eyelids press themselves. Our story begins in the misty margins of prehistory, a little place called Everywhere. This was a time before money, back when everything was a favor, nothing had a price tag, and the only thing made of gold was the sun. Imagine a woolly-haired fellow named Grug. Grug makes a good stone axe, very sharp, pretty balanced too. The kind of axe you could show off at cave parties. Now, Grug needs berries. Enter Omna, berry connoisseur and local gatherer. Grug wants Omna's berries, not a euphemism. Omna wants something in return. Grug presents his fine axe with a confident grunt. Omna eyes it, offers a handful of berries, and the first barter is born. No receipts, no cashback, just a very pointy axe and some arguably overripe raspberries. Beautiful. But then, problems arise, as they tend to in human history, usually around page 2. Omna's berries spoil quickly. Grug's axes last a while, so maybe Omna needs more than raspberries to make it fair. Perhaps a couple of nuts, a feather, maybe a fetching shell from that beach near the waterfall. But now we've complicated things. Is 5 berries, 2 nuts, 1 feather, and half a shell equal to an axe? Does anyone want feathers? What if we run out of feathers? What if Gary down the river just shows up with a whole sack of feathers? Now no one wants to trade for feathers because there's a feather bubble. You see where this is going. Thus, early humans, in all their sleepy wisdom, stumbled into the world's first economy. Trade bloomed like mold on old mammoth meat. We moved from bartering cows to counting them. Enter tally sticks, primitive calculators etched on bones. Yes, bones, because nothing says accounting quite like the femur of a large herbivore. Tally sticks were the sticky notes of the Stone Age. Gary owes me 3 deer hides. Etch. I gave Sooner a duck for that healing root. Etch. Memory was unreliable after all, and nothing ruins a good nap like someone forgetting a crucial duck debt. As society yawned forward, different groups settled on different things to use for trade. The Mesopotamians, early overachievers, started using little clay tokens to represent goods. It's absurdly adorable. Imagine tiny clay sheep, tiny clay barley, tiny clay jars, all stored in clay envelopes. Yes, envelopes. Because it's not a proper transaction until you need to open an envelope for it. And just like that, we started dreaming of value. Turning real things, ducks, axes, cows, into representations, into promises, into potential. The way a crumpled note in your wallet isn't really money, but a whisper of a promise that somewhere, someone, under the glow of a fluorescent bank light, agrees that it is. But let's not rush. There's comfort in this slower rhythm. A life measured in traded gossip, borrowed honey, and ledger bones. Under a starlit sky more ancient than spreadsheets, somewhere in the soft loam of memory, early humans settled the tab with whatever they could find. Grain, salt, teeth. Yes, teeth were sometimes currency. Who wouldn't want a purse full of molars? In this world of bartered fish and trust-dependent trades, economies were small, fragile, and deliciously inefficient. But they worked, mostly because people had nowhere to be. And if your neighbor tried to cheat you, you could just hit them with an axe. Ah, simpler times. And so, with every shell, every tally, every etched bone, humans were edging closer to something strange, shiny, and full of potential. But that peculiar thing called money hadn't been born just yet. For now, let your thoughts drift with the gentle hush of river reeds and the soft crackle of ancient firelight as Grug and Omna settle down for the night, their debts squared, their berries shared. Somewhere out there, the idea of money sleeps, but not for long. Chapter 2. Seashells, Swords and Sheep. The economics of slightly confused bartering. Long before stock markets, gold coins, or those crisp bills you always seem to lose in coat pockets, humans dealt in a glorious mess of items that made economic sense only if you squinted really hard and didn't think about it too long. Imagine yourself in a misty Mesopotamian village, sometime around 3000 BCE. It's early morning. The sun is stretching its golden limbs across the riverbanks, and you're bartering for breakfast. You sidle up to a neighbor with a fistful of fresh onions, hoping to snag some goat cheese. But alas, the neighbor has no interest in onions today. They're in the mood for millet. You sigh and begin the age-old dance of ancient economics, the three-party trade triangle. You'll need to find someone who wants onions and has millet, or someone who wants millet and has goat cheese, or perhaps a bored scribe with a particularly wide basket of options and a fondness for haggling. Welcome to the grand bazaar of bartering, where every transaction is a riddle and a scavenger hunt all rolled into one. This, sleepy traveller, was the earliest marketplace of the human spirit, brimming with hope, confusion, and the occasional accidental acquisition of 3 new goats when you only wanted 1 bolt of linen. People exchanged everything from animal hides to obsidian blades, salted fish to embroidered slingshots, which, admittedly, were more decorative than deadly. The system was logical enough in its own chaotic way. You gave what you had, hoped for what you wanted, and prayed that someone in walking distance was equally confused. But the truth is, bartering worked until it didn't. The problem was what the more philosophical Mesopotamians might have called the problem of the giant goat. Let's imagine, for a moment, that you're a potter with a particularly lovely clay jar. A nice one, beautifully glazed, possibly shaped like a mythical creature mid-nap. You'd like to trade it for something of equal usefulness. Say, a chicken. But across the bustling road, you make eye contact with Urshalim, the proud owner of a particularly fluffy goat. Urshalim likes your jar, loves it even. "Ah," he says, pointing dramatically, "this is the jar I need for my ceremonial lentils." And then he offers you the goat, the big one. You freeze. You weren't emotionally prepared for livestock. You don't own a pen. You barely have a garden. But refusing a barter in those days was a bit like unplugging someone's Wi-Fi today. It was shocking, disruptive, and liable to cause a community-wide existential crisis about fair exchange. So you sigh, accept the goat, and spend the rest of your week wondering how pottery ever led you to milking at dawn. Eventually, cultures from Sumer to the early Chinese dynasties realized something rather brilliant. Maybe it was time to use items that were desirable, but not so living. Enter the seashell. Yes, the seashell, nature's hard candy wrapper. In parts of Asia, Africa, and the Indian Ocean, cowrie shells became valuable trade goods. They were rare-ish, pretty, somewhat. And importantly, they didn't wander off in the night bleating for attention. Shells could be counted, stacked, and stored in small pouches that jingled pleasantly when one walked, an early version of wallet-induced wealth anxiety. Other cultures had their own spin. Ancient Chinese artisans used tiny knives cast from bronze as currency. Not the easiest thing to carry in a tunic pocket next to your soup spoon, but they sparkled and impressed the neighbors. In places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, people began to rely on weightier goods like grain and metal ingots as proto-money. Some temples even became the first banks, storing goods and issuing tallies on clay tablets. Your wealth wasn't held in your home, but in a quiet room behind a priest with spectacular headwear and a surprisingly sharp memory. And slowly, a dream began to take shape, a universal item of value, something durable, portable, trustworthy, preferably not shaped like a goat. The world, still young and groggy from its Stone Age slumber, was tiptoeing toward a new kind of trade. Less bartering, fewer accidental goats, and something just a tad more predictable. A yawn rolls through the age of shells and bronze trinkets as the idea of money becomes less about what you have and more about what people believe it's worth. The shimmer of belief, lighter than gold, more contagious than gossip, was about to change everything. But for now, drift gently along the stream of thought, where the jingle of cowries fades into hush and temples whisper with ledgers of emmer wheat. And somewhere beyond the dawn, something round and shiny awaits. Chapter 3. The Cows That Bought Everything. Imagine, for a moment, a valley so quiet you can hear a sheep sneeze from 3 hills away. In this dreamy patch of ancient earth, nestled between yawning mountains and under skies so wide they practically leaked sunlight, a curious transaction was taking place. A man named Doro, a goatherd of modest ambition and unruly facial hair, looked thoughtfully at a cow. Not just any cow, mind you, but Gorla, the cow. A sleek, hay-scented creature whose udder was rumoured to produce milk so creamy it could soothe the world's angriest aunties. Gorla was, as the sleepy dust of 8000 BCE's economy would have it, priceless, or priceful, depending on how you define it. Now, at this tender point in history, coins did not yet clink and paper wallets were not yet misplaced. The idea of money as a separate thing was still a dreamy whisper in humanity's collective nap. Back then, value came moving on 4 legs, or sometimes 2, if a particularly sprightly chicken was involved. And so, in the Fertile Crescent, where ancient onions grew fat in government-subsidized irrigation ditches and wheat waved like polite concert-goers, communities began shifting from simple bartering, "Here, take my carrots, give me your stone hammer," to something more symbolic. Animals, big, edible, and impossibly hard to lose between the couch cushions, began to serve as units of exchange. A cow like Gorla wasn't just a walking milkshake. She was salary, savings account, investment portfolio, and social status wrapped in hooves and cud. Cows provided not only dairy and meat, but also valuable manure, nature's original multi-purpose fertilizer/ambient cologne. To own a cow was to have wealth that nudged the lines between survival and respectable gossip. "Did you hear?" whispered one villager to another over hot lentil soup. Doro traded 3 goats and an unusually generous pile of lentils for Gorla. 3 goats. This development sent ripples through the sleepy village economy. Suddenly, people were re-evaluating their wealth. Is a really talkative goat worth half a cow? How many chickens equal 1 trustworthy dog? What conversion rate shall we use between a barrel of olive oil and a husband who listens? Over soup and sunrise, people began to agree, however loosely, that some animals held more stable value than others. Cows were best, with goats and sheep holding middle-tier status, and pigs always a little suspect due to their tendency to eat everything, including logic. And so, wealth became less about what you could hold in your grubby little hands and more about what you could count, feed, and chase when it wandered off. Doro, meanwhile, learned the hard way that wealth might also moo directly into your tent at 4 a.m. Still, the idea was cozy in its own prehistoric way. You weren't just rich, you were surrounded by your bank account. You could pet your finances, you could milk them. This was the beginning of a more abstract kind of economy, one based not just on practical trade, but on shared trust. If everyone agreed a cow had value, then it did. That collective belief, like storytelling itself, was enough to build worlds. Before long, these rudimentary animal-based systems of wealth were trotting across continents. From Mesopotamia to the African savannas, from the river valleys of India to the misty hills of early Europe, livestock became the currency that moved the world. But animals, for all their friendly charm and four-legged nobility, had their downsides. They required feeding, housing, and the occasional awkward apology when they wandered into sacred spaces. Carrying your savings to market now meant bringing a herd with you, an act that often raised both dust clouds and eyebrows. Life, it turned out, needed something a bit lighter, a tad shinier, and a whole lot less prone to chewing your sandal straps. And so, even as Gawler grazed peacefully on a hill with an air of bovine mystery, the world began to dream of money that didn't wander off at dawn. Something less moo-eye, but that would come later. For now, let your eyes grow as heavy as a cow's eyelids at sunset, and drift softly beside the flickering fires of ancient shepherds. For just beyond the next hill, we'll explore the glittering origins of value, without the licking, mooing, or chewing. Let's follow that trail together. Gently. Chapter 4. Of Cows and Coinless Commerce. Picture it. The breeze sighs lazily through an open-air market on the edge of a Mesopotamian village, sometime around 3000 BCE. The air is thick with the untidy perfume of wool, olives, goats, future hummus, and mild body odor, garnished generously with the sharp tang of bartered dreams. Welcome to early trade, where the concept of money had not yet been invented, but people were already quite good at arguing about the price of onions. Now, in this market, beneath a patchwork canopy of woven reeds and ambitions, stand two traders locked in intense negotiation. One has a barrel of dates so sticky that local bees have organized a labor union. The other has a goat that is either majestic or profoundly confused. They are trying to strike a deal. The problem is easy to summarize but oddly complex to solve. How many dates equal one average goat? Barter, dear sleeper, was the first system of transaction. No shiny coins, no numbers, no credit cards whispering sweet nothings about rewards points. Just stuff for other stuff. Grain for fish, leather for lentils. 2 ducks and a nod for a handmade spoon. It was charming, inconvenient, and about as precise as measuring time by watching bread rise. You see, the joy of bartering was that it relied not on fixed values, but on mutual desperation. For instance, if you really needed fish and the fisherman didn't particularly care for your cabbage, you might have to sweeten the deal. Perhaps throw in a carrot, or your hat, or the promise to stop talking about your cabbage. That, my friend, is where economics begins, awkwardly, and probably while someone is holding a chicken. And yet, barter had its limits, especially when divorce-level drama erupted over whether or not someone's donkey was worth a basket of onions and a loaf of alarming-looking sourdough. The whole system began groaning under its own logistical weight. For one, objects had trust issues. Cows, while deeply respected and frequently honored, were famously unpocketable. You had to lead them to market like a clopping argument in progress. And secondly, they occasionally ran away mid-transaction, thus voiding the deal and creating cow-based heartbreak. This is where some clever Mesopotamian genius, someone named perhaps Akil or just Hey You, had a very sleepy notion. What if instead of dragging your barter items with you, you used a placeholder instead? A promise perhaps, a symbol, something that said, "I totally have a cow at home, trust me." Thus, scribbles began to emerge. And by scribbles, I mean cuneiform. Yes, the world's first written language. Those tiny triangular ticks poked lovingly into clay tablets were invented partly because people needed receipts. Imagine that. All of written history may have begun because someone didn't want to carry an actual chicken in every conversation. Clerks, those early accountants of the ancient world, began to record who gave what to whom and when. It was not yet money, but it was a ledger. And that, gentle listener, is something like magic. Turning transactions into stories, stories into tablets, and tablets into records you could store, not in a wallet, but in a remarkably dusty closet. And still, value remained fluid like a sleepy river. One year, sheep were all the rage. The next, barley was the hot commodity. Supply and demand, the lullabies of markets, were beginning to hum, soft and ancient through the collective dreams of civilization. Temples, those early administrative centers and conveniently God-flavored banks, took it even further. They stored goods, they distributed rations, they tracked offerings. Somewhere between the divine and the domestic, they began to look suspiciously like places where society was testing the waters of currency. And yes, they also accepted cows, but only freshly mooed ones. So here we are, a quiet, glimmery moment on the path to money's invention. A world full of traders and tales, where value floated like incense in the air and was measured in promises, proportions, and the occasional fish wrapped in guesswork. As darkness settles over our imaginary Mesopotamian market, and the goat finally makes peace with the basket of dates, a new idea begins to peek over the horizon, a symbol not of goods, but of agreed-upon value itself. Let's take a slow, dreamy step toward that idea in our next chapter. For now, rest easy under the stars that once watched scribes invent the world's first bedtime accounting. Chapter 5. The Sacred Cow, the Lazy Ox, and the First Receipt. Long before gold coins jingled in belts and digital dollars danced through wires, there were cows, and not the cartoonish pink-nosed kind nibbling clover in a picture book meadow, but actual swishing-tailed mooing manure-making cows. In the ancient world, cows weren't just milk machines. They were mobile money, large, living investments that mooed politely while your wealth grazed. In the wide windswept grasslands and the warm valleys of early civilizations, people realized something wonderfully obvious. Cows were useful. They could pull plows. They gave milk. They made more cows. And when diplomacy failed, they occasionally ran off with someone else's cornfield and made the problem go away. So people began to count their worth in livestock. An impressive dowry might be 1 brindled ox and 2 mildly confused goats. If your neighbor said he'd give you a fine barley field for your cow, you'd keep a close eye on the condition of that barley, and an even closer one on the sneaky way he tried to sneak in an aging, wheezy sheep to sweeten the deal. The word pecuniary, in fact, used today to describe all things moneysome, comes from the Latin word pecus, meaning cattle. Yes, it turns out the Romans were quite literal about where their money stood, on 4 legs. But cows, for all their cud-chewing charm, are not the most practical form of currency. They're hard to stack. They don't appreciate being put in coin purses. Difficult to make change for, too. I'll give you half a cow and a chicken leg doesn't quite inspire trust in trade, even in the Bronze Age. That's when humanity, clever, sleepy-eyed humanity, decided it might be wise to shift from things that wander and moo to things that sit still and shine. Enter trade tokens. Tiny clay nods to economic genius. Picture yourself in Mesopotamia, somewhere around 3000 BCE. The air is dry and warm, and the earthen buildings smell faintly of sun-baked bread. Here, amidst bustling bazaars and riverbank markets, Sumerians, those clever scribblers of the early world, started using little clay objects to represent goods. A cone might mean a jar of oil, a sphere, possibly a sheep, a cylinder with suspicious squiggles on the side. Well, it might stand for 3 barley rations or a long conversation with an accountant. To keep track of these trade tokens, people tucked them into a larger hollow clay ball known as a bulla. It was sealed shut, much like a piggy bank. On the outside, they'd carefully press symbols representing the contents inside, effectively creating the first ever itemized receipt. And since breaking open the bulla meant it couldn't be reused, it discouraged dishonest swapping or clay-based scams. Sorry, Baruch, I can't just change the barley into sheep now. The bulla's sealed. A fact which greatly annoyed dishonest Baruchs, but delighted future historians and bedtime historians like us. And so, the bulla became proof of a promise, a kind of proto-contract that said, somewhere in this clay egg is your stuff. Trust me, I wrote it on the outside. Within these lumpy orbs lay not just economic records, but the gentle, foundational hum of systems developing. Systems built on trust, symbols, and a shared belief in abstract representations. Or, if we're being more poetic, the human yearning to carry meaning in one's pocket without having to bring a goat to the grocery store. This small clay innovation quietly tipped the world toward complexity. The tokens grew symbols. Symbols became pictographs. Pictographs, after several dramatic meetings and a few thousand years, became writing. And all because some ancient accountant got tired of counting actual sheep. So here we are, drifting through dreams of bovine-based economics and the pleasant squish of Sumerian tokens between thumb and forefinger. Isn't it poetic, really, that someone's first bill of sale looked like a cracked cookie full of pebbles? As we rest beneath the broad sky of old Mesopotamia, with its eternal stars and gentle breezes whispering through date palms, the night begins to yawn wider. And just beyond the sleepy torches of the village marketplace, a new whisper begins to echo. How might the divine and the royal get involved in this whole messy business of barter and bullas? We'll find out soon enough. For now, let your thoughts drift, like a lazy ox chewing dreams, as the ancient clay memories settle softly into sleep. Chapter 6. The Cow That Bought a Canoe. Bartering Gets Complicated. Now, picture this. The fire is crackling softly in a prehistoric village, made entirely of thatched roofs, enthusiastic pottery, and the occasional goat making life decisions in the middle of the footpath. Night has fallen. Stars blink awake like lazy fireflies, and somewhere nearby, someone's still trying to trade a chicken for a bronze nose ring. Ah, yes. Welcome to the barter era. In the beginning, money didn't jingle. It just mooed, clucked, squeaked, or spoiled in the sun. Long before shiny coins and overly complex banking apps, humans negotiated value the old-fashioned way, by swapping actual stuff. If you wanted shoes and only had onions, You had to hope someone nearby was both barefoot and had a salad to prepare. To many people, bartering sounds charming, a simpler time of fair exchange and neighborly haggling. But really, it was like trying to shop in a flea market run by goats. You needed the right thing at the right time in the right quantity. And fingers crossed it didn't die, rot, squawk, or escape before the deal was done. For example, say you're a fisherman. You've caught a modestly impressive salmon, sleek, shiny, and fresh. You fancy a new spear because, frankly, yours looks like it's been through 3 minor wars and part of a canoe building contest. So you march on over to Darnock the blacksmith. He makes spears, fine spears. You dangle your fish, lovely specimen that it is, and make your pitch. But Darnock isn't hungry. His wife just made stew, trout stew. He's fully stewed. What he really wants is wool. He's got cold knees, hasn't had decent leg warmers since the last barter festival, when someone tried to pass off dog hair as authentic Luvian fleece. Tragic. Now suddenly, your fish isn't buying you a spear. You need to go find Lena the shepherdess. But Lena doesn't want fish either. Her goats won't stop sniffing it, and she's frankly over it. What Lena wants is clay. She's taken up pottery lately. Keeps dreaming of a vase shaped like a squirrel. So now you're off to find Amesh the potter, who somehow wants fish. Congratulations. You've just completed what anthropologists would someday define as a multinodal barter cascade. In summary, you sold a fish to buy a sheep to trade for a spear, and nobody even gave you change. Bartering, in its essence, was a system of hopeful coincidences. Every deal rested upon the unpredictable whimsy of people's needs, schedules, and seasonal goat moods. It worked mostly, but just barely. There were bright sides. People talked more. Whole days were spent wandering about communities, offering and declining things with dramatic flair and occasional interpretive dance. Some villages even developed semi-formal barter rituals with hand gestures, chants, or comedic skits to settle disputes, because arguing over lentils just hits differently when puppets are involved. Value, back then, was far more personal. The worth of an item depended not on intrinsic scarcity, but how badly you needed it that day. To someone with cold feet, a pair of woolen socks was worth more than a golden goblet. To a goose herder, waterproof sandals priceless. To a romantic potter, a bouquet of painted duck feathers might be everything. This flexibility made barter incredibly human. Messy, inventive, occasionally smelly. But let us not romanticize too wildly. A society that runs on exact matches and unpredictable needs tends to stall when you least expect it. Think of the traveller with 5 bushels of turnips and nobody interested in soup, or the woman with exquisite embroidered hats, but a powerful allergy to everything anyone tried to exchange for them. It was clear something needed to change. And so, in time, the clever humans did what they often do when their systems get too complicated. They invented something completely new to make life easier, and in doing so, laid the groundwork for arguments about interest rates for the next 10,000 years. But that, dear dreamer, is a tale for after this. Deep breath, when the moonlight grows heavier on your eyelids and humans take a quiet step towards something shiny. Chapter 7. Spice Islands, Barter Boats, and the Smell of Expensive Soup. Close your eyes, dear dreamer, and smell that. A subtle blend of cinnamon, cloves, and the faintest whisper of nutmeg, wafting on the breeze like the ghost of a warm kitchen in the middle of a thunderstorm. We've drifted gently into a time when spices were more than mere flavor. They were currency. And no, we're not exaggerating for effect. People quite literally risked their lives, their ships, and their increasingly large 16th century hats for a handful of peppercorns. Tonight, our sleepy sails take us to the edge of the known world, or what passed for it anyway, to the legendary Spice Islands, also known as the Maluku Islands of Indonesia. Back then, if you could name drop nutmeg at a dinner party, you were either royalty or someone who knew someone who once brushed shoulders with someone who might have briefly dated a Portuguese spice merchant. Let us begin with the reason why spices became so precious. Contrary to what your modern pantry implies, these fragrant wonders didn't just exist for making your curry punchier or your pie more nostalgic. In the hazy twilight of the Middle Ages, spices were believed to have almost magical properties. They preserved meat, treated ailments, freshened unwashed breath, an underrated victory, and crucially, told everyone around you that you were rich enough to make your dinner taste like something other than salted beef and resignation. But Europe, dear listener, was not known for its balmy climate or aromatic treasures. For those with dreams of cumin grandeur, the challenge was this: how do you get these spicy specks from the distant east to your dinner table in Florence or Bruges, or wherever you might find heavily embroidered tunics and a dramatic love of bread? The answer was commerce. Scratchy, salty, mulled wine-fueled commerce. And that brings us to barter boats. You see, long before floating container ships brought us Amazon orders packed with far too much cardboard, frisky entrepreneur sailors took to the seas in creaking wooden vessels loaded with cloth, weapons, and silver, and returned laden with things that smelled much nicer. In every port, whether in Calicut or Hormuz, Cebu or Cairo, these sailors engaged in what you might call flavor diplomacy, trading items of questionable value, broken mirrors, glass beads, maybe a horseshoe, for cloves or cardamom, which could then be resold back home at a price so steep it made European nobles wonder if they could just sprinkle gold on their soup instead. Now, here's where it gets even more deliciously absurd. In certain eras, especially during the 13th and 14th centuries, the price of pepper was so high in parts of Europe, it was used almost exactly like money. A peasant might pay rent in sacks of pepper. Debts could be settled in cloves. Dowries included bundles of cinnamon. The idea of paying taxes in soup seasoning today might sound silly, but at the time, people genuinely hoarded spices the way we now hoard single-use passwords and backup phone chargers. Some towns even had spice vaults. Think of them as the ancient world's equivalent of a security deposit box, but smellier and more flammable. And unlike coins, spices didn't jingle. They rustled softly, like whispers from faraway lands. They turned money into an olfactory affair. This, in many ways, was money evolving through the human senses. Where earlier systems had been about sheer usefulness, cows, seashells, or salt chunks, this version of wealth was based on desire and scarcity. The nose wanted what the wallet couldn't always afford. And so, as history shows, wars were waged, empires were built, and truly unfortunate mustaches were groomed all in pursuit of the delicious smell of economic power. Oh, and let's not forget the middlemen. There were so many merchants between the source of the spice and the final sale that the price inflated like a well-fed goose. Indians sold to Arab traders, who sold to Venetians, who sold to French nobles, who simmered their pots with a single clove and then asked, "Did you smell that? That, my dear, is wealth." Of course, such a finely scented economy couldn't last forever. Soon, adventurers and map scribblers started asking a rather spicy question. What if we sailed around the middlemen altogether? But that, sweet listener, is a story better steeped in the sea salt breezes of a different chapter. For now, Let the scent of cinnamon dreams and clove-flavored fortunes lull you gently into the next tale. Chapter 8. The Magical Misunderstanding of Metal. Curl up close now, closer. Chapter 8 begins in a softly clinking world, where the future shimmered in the palm of a hand, and society began its long, glinting love affair with metal. Not just any metal, no. Special, heavy, shiny metal. The kind that jingles when you walk too confidently into a tavern. Yes, dear listener, tonight we quietly shuffle into the era when humanity decided that hunks of copper, silver, and gold were somehow magically meaningful. At first, metals were mostly admired, the way one might admire a peculiar seashell or an unusually large potato. Nice, but not life-changing. Metal could be beaten into tools or worn as decoration, sure. But somewhere around 3,000 years ago, people in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and across the Aegean began whispering the same dreamy question. What if this sparkly thing could buy me a goat? And just like that, goats and everything else were never the same again. The first metal money was often raw, unadorned lumps, clumsy and not especially portable. Imagine going to the market with a sack of ingots, puffing and wheezing just to buy an onion. But people were persistent and increasingly fond of testing nature's heavier objects. In Lydia, modern-day Turkey, around 600 BCE, an odd little innovation occurred. Coins. These were special. Not just because they were roundish and shiny, but because the Lydian king, Aliates, decided to stamp little pictures onto them. Lions mostly. Because what better way to inspire confidence in a currency than to press a roaring jungle cat into it? This wasn't just decoration, it was state-sponsored symbolism. The message was clear. This coin is real, this coin is royal, and yes, you can probably buy 2 goats and a small jug of wine with it. Now, let's drift a little eastward to China, where their coinage journey ran on a slightly different set of wheels, or rather, blades. Very early Chinese coins were shaped like tools, spades, knives, and other metallic representations of everyday objects. It's as if they looked at the idea of symbolic value and took it quite literally. Hey, if this knife is worth something, why not make a coin that looks like a knife? It was an economy carved in charm and confusion. Of course, these knife-shaped coins weren't meant to slice your cabbage. Their edges were blunted, their points dulled. More ceremonial tokens than functional cutlery. Still, you had to admire their creativity. Where Lydia gave the world lions, China gave it tiny blunt shovels, and both worked more or less. Over time, these coins began to spread, like dandelion seeds on a sleepy breeze, wafting across empires, rumbling along camel caravans, trotting in saddlebags down silk and sandalwood paths. People were entranced not just by the metal itself, but by what it promised. A token, a talisman, an agreement that whispered, yes, this small shiny thing can be your dinner. Of course, none of this was set in stone, or metal, so to speak. The value of coins depended on trust, availability, and sometimes healthy doses of royal decree. It wasn't long before rulers began adjusting the metal content to suit their rather expensive hobbies, such as building vast marble temples to unnamed gods or hosting 14-day banquets with bottomless fig platters. Currency debasement, as historians whisper rather sleepily, became a real trend. Essentially, kings would take a real, solid silver coin, melt it down, blend it with a cheaper metal, say tin or lead, restamp it, and then declare, "It's still totally worth the same, I promise." Many people nodded politely, but quietly began hoarding the older, shinier coins. Trust, once again, proved more valuable than the metal itself. And so, from golden Lydian lions to blunt Chinese knives, humanity's metallic infatuation matured. Money had transcended barter and began shimmering into something stranger. It spoke of state power, of inherited trust or betrayal, and of a society inching closer to the thrilling danger of abstract value. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavier and your mind clinks softly like a purse of old drachmas, just imagine an ancient market at dusk, place where coins chat quietly in pockets, stars begin to glimmer, and somewhere someone is asking the vendor, "Do you take lion or shovel?" Sleep tight, dear listener. In our next tale, we'll unroll a new chapter of complexity, literally. For just over that hill, money is about to go flat and start rustling in the wind. Chapter 9. Pebbles, Parchments, and the Promise of Paper. Long before the ATM card nestled in your wallet, even before coins clinked in Roman togas or banknotes fluttered through merchant stalls, money took on some rather whimsical shapes. In this chapter, we drift like a feather over the surprisingly soft tale of how the world went from heavy metal to the whisper-thin elegance of paper money. You may imagine paper currency as the logical, lightweight remedy for carrying around sacks of bronze cow-shaped ingots, and you'd be right, but also blissfully unaware of just how many awkward centuries it took to get there. Our story tonight leads us gently to ancient China, somewhere during the Tang Dynasty, a period of blossoming poetry, rich silks, and tax systems elaborate enough to give a poet hives. Around the 7th century, Chinese merchants were quietly grumbling about the weight of copper coins. You see, doing good business required large transactions, and large transactions meant lugging around heavy satchels of round coins with square holes in the middle. These were strung together like a chunky necklace of inconvenience. Merchants, being the sleep-deprived innovators of yore, decided if they couldn't carry the money, perhaps the money could carry a promise. Enter the promissory note, a quiet little piece of paper that declared, "This represents 10,000 copper coins, but isn't it nice we don't actually have to carry all that?" Initially a local convenience, these notes were like love letters sent between merchants and banks. They said, "I trust you, and my back thanks you." By the time we reached the Song Dynasty, around the 11th century, these paper promises had evolved. The Chinese government, always keen on getting involved when things become even vaguely profitable, saw this trend and thought, why let the merchants have all the fun? Thus came the official government-backed jiaozi, the ancestor of the modern banknote, printed lovingly and officially by state-run paper mills. Now, unlike your printer jam at home, these mills were well-oiled operations, churning out delicate slips of mulberry bark paper, adorned with calligraphy and issued under strict watch. They even stamped them with multiple official seals, because if you're going to invent money, a little flair doesn't hurt. But if you're picturing a calm economic utopia, you must remember, this was human history, and humans, bless them, tend to take a good thing and run it straight into the ditch of unintended consequences. The Song Dynasty, impressed with its own cleverness, printed more jiaozi than the market needed. Prices, like hot air balloons, soared skyward. Value deflated. Panic fluttered through large silk sleeves. And thus began one of history's first documented bouts of inflation by enthusiasm. Still, the idea of paper money was lighter than any coin, and, ultimately, too convenient to vanish. It would take centuries for this floaty idea to drift westward. You'd think Europe might have caught on sooner, but alas, medieval Europeans were still busy biting coins to test them for gold and trading sheep with scowling sincerity. It wasn't until the 17th century that Europe stumbled into the world of banknotes. Sweden, surprisingly, made the leap first. The Swedes had a knack for thinking ahead, and, perhaps more pressingly, their currency, called plate money, was literally giant slabs of copper. Imagine carrying a pizza-sized metal disc to pay for lunch. You'd probably invent paper too. So in 1661, Stockholm's Banco printed and issued the first official European banknotes, an act that must have felt a bit like writing fiction and hoping the cashier played along. England followed soon after, with the Bank of England issuing printed notes in denominations so large that you'd need to be part baron, part dreamer to own one. The notes weren't exactly pocket size or user-friendly. Early ones came blank and had to be handwritten for each transaction. But the message was clear. The world was warming to the idea that money didn't have to be heavy, just believable. Over time, governments across the globe created more sophisticated paper currencies, each stamped with regal portraits and important-sounding serial numbers. Different nations flirted with designs, watermarks, anti-fraud techniques, and fun colors like small children decorating grown-up IOUs. And through it all, the world discovered something softly magical, that a thin sheet of fibers could carry enormous weight, not just economic, but imaginary, cultural, emotional. We began to believe in paper like cats believe in sunbeams, completely, irrationally, and without a moment's hesitation. And so, with our dreams riding on crinkled pages and inked promises, we found ourselves moving into a new financial era, where belief itself became part of the capital. But something else was stirring, not in banks or treasuries, but in the minds of philosophers, thieves, and aspiring emperors alike. A story for another chapter, just ahead. Chapter 10. Seashells and Stone Wheels, when nature was currency. Close your eyes and picture a beach. The tide is sighing softly. Starfish are pretending not to notice you, and somewhere in the distance, a crab is conducting official crustacean business. This is the romantic backdrop, dear listener, of one of humanity's oldest choices in currency, the humble seashell. Yes, before there were banks, stock markets, credit scores, or the stomach-tightening anxiety of watching your receipt say, "Card declined," people exchanged shiny little objects that the ocean so kindly sneezed onto the shore. Cowrie shells, to be specific, became one of the longest used forms of proto-money in human history. Sparkly, smooth, and conveniently sized to get lost in your sock. Cowries were widely used across Africa, Asia, and even parts of Europe and the Pacific Islands. They weren't just pretty. They were durable, portable, and difficult to counterfeit, unless you happened to have a pet mollusk trained in embroidery. Their appeal lay in their aesthetic charm, an almost magical little design from nature. It's as if the ocean said, "Here, humanity, I made you a coin with a sense of occasion." Now, using objects from nature as money wasn't limited to shells. Far from it. If you zoom out on a dreamy historical map, the kind drawn in wisps of cloud and whispering parchment, you'll find humanity getting terribly creative with what constituted currency. In Yap, a group of Pacific islands, villagers used limestone wheels as money. But before your imagination rolls in the wrong direction, let's qualify that. These weren't pocket-sized limestone circles, mind you. They were massive stone discs, some as large as 6 feet across and weighing several tons, called rhinestones. Yes, literal monetary boulders. Forget wallet-sized. These were wheelbarrow-sized, or actually, team of sailors-sized. These rhinestones weren't carried around because attempting to fit one into your man purse would likely end your day quite abruptly. Instead, ownership was a matter of social consensus. If you gave someone your giant stone coin, they didn't drag it to their front lawn. No, everyone just agreed, yes, that's Steve's rock now. And that was that. Good old Steve, basking in the fiscal glow of stationary wealth. It worked surprisingly well for a long time. The stones had value because they were hard to carve and harder still to transport. They were quarried in distant islands and sailed over treacherous waters for trading. The labor and risk involved imbued them with meaning. And isn't that always the heart of money? What it represents, not what it is. You see, the idea of value is something humans are terribly good at inventing. We look at a shiny piece of metal, a shell, or a rock the size of a hatchback and say, yes, that equals 6 chickens and a goat. And as long as everyone agrees, the economy, in its sleepy, ancient form, thrums gently along. In fact, the silliest part of all this might be how not silly it really was. Barter, as we mused earlier, got a bit awkward over time. You can only swap so many goats for cabbages before someone says, "Can I write you an IOU?" And even then, you'd need a trustworthy face and maybe a beard far too wise for its age. But a currency system using natural tokens. That was barter turned elegant. It allowed people to store their wealth, move it around, with the exception of those fond of rock, islands, and keep score in a world before spreadsheets. Of course, questions arose. What if a tide rolled in and flooded the market with seashells? What if someone forged a new rock and claimed it came from a distant land? What if your cowrie shell had a suspicious chip, and the village elder squinted at it and said, "Looks fishy"? And oh, how many arguments surely began with the famous phrase, "That is not Steve's rock. It's been outside my hut since my grandfather's goats were teenagers." But even as civilizations grew and trade netted wider oceans, these early forms of money stuck around longer than one might expect. Nature, after all, makes alluring coinage. There's something timeless about exchanging what the earth has shaped, round, smooth, glistening, for something else shaped by human need. We're inching closer now to the birth of coins in metal, stamped with faces, gods, lions, or ambiguous birds in confusing poses. But here, in this moment, carried on the warm breeze of an island's evening or nestled in the call of waves brushing over shell-strewn sands, money was still soft, still slow, and still shaped by tides. Let's drift onward, sleepy traveller, into the lands where kings start minting dreams into silver. Chapter 11. The Coin Whisperers of Lydia. Imagine a land where the rivers run gold and the merchants all carry little hammers, not for war or for carpentry, but for clinking tiny discs of metal into each other's hands. Welcome to Lydia, a dreamy little kingdom tucked into western Anatolia, where history took a nap and woke up holding a coin. Lydia, around 600 BCE, was not particularly famous for its cuisine, mostly grains and more grains, but it was rich in something far shinier, electrum. That's a natural alloy of gold and silver, helpfully deposited by the wise old Pactolus River, which burbled with precious metals as if to say, "Why not put me in your pocket?" Now, up until this moment in the past, that is before the Lydians got clever, people were still relying on barter, weighing out hunks of metal or trading a camel for, say, 30 baskets of figs and a slightly annoyed goose. But weighing things slows down transactions and bruises the goose. Enter King Aliates, or according to some, his far glitzier son, Croesus, the same Croesus of rich as Croesus fame. Either way, it was under their rule that money as we know it had its shiny little birthday. instead of just lugging around weighable chunks of electrum, the Lydians began stamping them into something portable, recognizable, and, crucially, standard. These early coins weren't minted with pictures of adorable puppies or national flags just yet. No, the Lydians kept things tastefully dramatic. Most of the first coins bore the image of a lion, sometimes a lion fighting a bull, because even then, a bullfight meant business. The stamp acted like a kind of royal guarantee. "This is not just a blob of metal," it whispered. "This is a thing with value. Croesus says so." The invention of coinage was, for trade, much like giving the world a common language, though instead of vowels and consonants, it spoke in glint and clink. Suddenly, a merchant didn't need to weigh, haggle, or pretend he didn't mind carrying a live chicken under his robe. With coins, value clicked between fingers, deals sealed with a satisfying jingle, and travel became lighter, both in baggage and in heart. The process of making these coins was delightfully fussy. First, someone, probably named Aethron, or something equally whispery, would pour molten electrum into little lentil-shaped blobs called blanks. Not edible, but alarmingly symmetrical. Then, these were carefully placed between engraved dies, one below, one above, and walloped with a hammer with considerable ceremony. Whack. Instant lion coin. Each thump likely echoed through the royal mint, like a percussion section of economy awakening. The sound of money being born, not minted in silence, but with the satisfying thunk of sovereignty. Somewhere in Lydia, a temple priest nodded approvingly each time. Of course, others soon copied them. The Greeks, eager as ever, saw the coins and said, "Oh, that's clever, we'll take 12. But the Lydians had truly struck first, pun gently intended. It was the union of state power, metallurgy, and river deposits with low self-control, all pressed into small, glittering tokens of trust. Electrum, of course, had its little problem. It's a naturally occurring mix, so the gold to silver ratio varied from one coin to another, which meant some of these early coins were, let's call them, optimistically valued. Eventually, Croesus, being a man of both wealth and apparently mild OCD, would solve this by issuing separate coins of pure gold and pure silver. That act alone nudged Lydian money from experimental treasure blobs into the realm of serious economic infrastructure. Sovereign, sparkly, and stable. Well, as stable as anything ruled by a man who wore leopard-trimmed sandals. Before long, traveling traders began to recognize the lion mark not just as a Lydian boast, but as an invitation. "This coin is known from Sardis to Samos," it said, "and you won't get laughed out of the market square for offering it." Thus, in this softly golden era, the coin was born, not merely a medium of exchange, but a portable poem, a tiny piece of collective belief glinting under the Anatolian sun. And oh, how they would spread, jingling into the far corners of the Mediterranean, clinking in the tunics of philosophers, poets, and the occasional extremely distracted donkey. And as we let the coins of Lydia rest now, nestled in the dusty folds of velvet purses and museum glass cases, let your breath settle like gold dust in calm river water. For ahead lies a world eager to copy and conquer. Chapter 12. The Curious Case of Coin Clinks and Royal Faces. Close your eyes, if they're not fluttering like soft curtains already, and imagine a world where metal begins to whisper its worth. Tonight, we land softly in ancient Lydia. No, not your neighbor Lydia, who makes strong tea and stronger opinions, but the kingdom of Lydia. Somewhere around the 7th century BCE, nestled in what we now call Western Turkey. It was a land not only of hills and olive groves and people with extremely detailed beards, but also of one very shiny idea: coinage. Now, Lydia had something the rest of the world rather envied: naturally occurring electrum. That's not a spell from a wizarding school. It's a naturally found alloy of gold and silver, like nature's own bite-sized glitter bar. The river Pactolus ran thick with it, deposit by dreamy deposit, probably the only river whose washing didn't involve socks. And it was here, in little metal blobs, about the size of a juicy bean, that money finally decided to take a shape. Picture a Lydian merchant in a tidy linen tunic, squinting in the sun, haggling over goats or olive oil, or those tiny music bells that everyone pretends not to like but secretly loves. Up until now, deals depended on weighing bits of metal or agreeing awkwardly on the goat-to-jar ratio. Not the most bedtime-friendly bartering system. Enter King Aliates, and later his dazzlingly named son, King Croesus, the metaphorical grandfathers of retail therapy. Under their reign, Lydia began minting coins standardized in weight and purity, which was both revolutionary and suspiciously convenient for tax collection. For the first time, people could carry a pocketful of value, stamped with a lion's head or a facing owl, or eventually the refined and remarkably symmetrical face of someone rich and powerful. The coins clinked, they gleamed, and most importantly, they told everyone, this is worth something, because the king says so. It was the dawn of what humans now call trust in authority, though you may know it better as, well, if it's got someone's profile on it, it must be worth a sandwich. As the metal coins traveled up trade routes, onto ships, and into other nations' marketplaces, they began shedding their rustic blobness in favor of sleek, disc-shaped forms. The Greeks were particularly obsessed with making coins attractive. Some of our earliest numismatic specimens are mini masterpieces, tiny sculptures jingling in togas, each scratch a whisper from antiquity. And oh, the symbolism. Athena with an owl, because wisdom doesn't hoot itself. A turtle for Aegina, because, well, maybe turtles were the original slow and steady investors. Each stamped face was both a guarantee of value and a billboard for civic pride, sort of like putting your city's mascot on $1, or your favorite philosopher on a coin, because he once said something clever about figs. But no matter how lovely they were, and they were, all those early coins shared something in common. They required people to believe in them. You couldn't eat a coin. Not comfortably, anyway. It had no real use beyond its agreed-upon exchange value. And so emerged one of the sleepiest, most powerful forces in economic history: social consensus. Imagine that. Millions of people across deserts and oceans nodding silently and saying, yes, this round metal friend is worth a loaf of bread. It's collective imagination at its cutest. Of course, once you attach value to a thing, some people get very interested in making more of it. Forgers, clippers, and shady currency innovators joined the conversation, some stamping their own coins, others shaving the edges like cheese to pocket a few precious flakes. Ancient economies got their first taste of inflation and disappointment in human nature. Still, the coin prevailed. Durable, portable, and ever so jingly, it fit neatly into robes, coin purses, and the occasional sandal. It anchored trade, defined power, and gave squirrels everywhere something entirely inappropriate to bury. So tonight, as the clink of early civilization echoes through the centuries like a lullaby made of pocket change, we cradle the idea that something so small, so shiny, could one day shape empires, and just as a coin changed hands and changed history, we'll drift gently onward to another tale of commerce, caravans, and something surprisingly silk. Chapter 13. The Whispering Ledgers of the Temple Accountants. Near the banks of the gentle Euphrates, where reeds once swayed with the gossip of the wind, and the stars blinked kindly down upon the ziggurats of ancient Babylonia, there dwelled a quiet army of the unsung, temple accountants. Now, stay awake, just long enough, for I promise, these are not like modern accountants, those loyal conjurers of spreadsheets and coffee. No, these were priestly number keepers dressed in linen robes, walking barefoot across coal stone floors, whispering to clay tablets by oil lamp glow. Their ledgers didn't live in Excel, but in soft bricks of unfired mud, etched with careful strokes from a reed stylus. And their calculations told the eternal tales of barley, silver, sheep, and trust. Because tonight, sleepy traveler, we are wandering through the dreamlike domain of proto-banking. Let's set the scene. Around 2000 BCE in Mesopotamia, long before ATMs scolded you at midnight, and far before plastic cards got declined at cafes, temples were not just places for divine devotion and ceremonial chants. They were also, somewhat surprisingly, the city's most dependable piggy banks. You see, temples were sacred, and sacred places were safe places. And when people have precious things, like silver or sacks of grain they don't want stolen while they're off weaving carpets or arguing over who forgot to feed the donkey, they start looking for a secure spot. Enter the temple vaults, cool, dry, and blessed by gods who, incidentally, disapproved strongly of theft. So townsfolk would pad across sun-baked courtyards with their offerings, not always heartfelt spiritual tributes, mind you, but more like deposits. A farmer with 3 shekels worth of barley might entrust it to the temple and receive a gleaming little clay receipt. Cuneiform kisses baked into permanence. Others might loan silver to the temple in return for interest. A concept so ancient it was practically crusty by the time Rome was born. Interest in Mesopotamia literally came from the word that also meant calf, because, as any sleepy cow herder might tell you, if you lend 1 cow, you expect to get 2 back when spring blossoms the fields. Nature, fertile and rhythmic, inspired these economic metaphors. Even silver, which does not procreate to our knowledge, was treated as though it could have offspring in time. It's rather romantic, really, a kind of glimmering faith in patience. Now, about those temple accountants. Imagine a sleepy scholar in the flicker of a flame, surrounded by tablets, quietly murmuring the day's credits and debits like bedtime prayers. They tracked incoming goods, goats, grain, wool, and outgoing ones too, always balancing the divine books. And unlike modern finance, where a decimal out of place can send an intern into exile, these ancient calculators thought in terms of weight. Silver wasn't yet coins, it was weighed by the shekel, which at the time referred to a specific chunk of mass, rather than a jingling piece of metal in your pocket. Sometimes, people didn't even take their silver back. They just used the clay receipts as proof of their wealth. Why carry silver when I have this delightful tablet confirming I own some? They might coo while sipping watered wine in a shady courtyard. And soon, these tablets began to circulate on their own. One man's temple credit became another man's payment. It was like having a debit card made of earth and prophecy, and slightly less prone to demagnetization. Some clever historians have argued this was the true beginning of banking, not in the noisy markets of Florence or the bustling alleys of London, But here, among the pyramidal shrines where gods and ledgers shared the same address, a sacred economy where spirituality and solvency gently coexisted over lentils and incense. But why did temples of all places become these sleepy fortresses of finance? Well, trust. When the gods are watching, and also when priests have your barley hostage, people tend to behave better. The temples had enduring reputations, scribes trained in both prayer and addition, and perhaps most importantly, enormous walls. And as history rolled forward, more folks wanted in on the action. The idea of lending, of trusting, of promising something later for something today, spread like storytelling under a starry sky. So next time you look at your bank balance and sigh gently into your chamomile tea, think back to those ancient priests counting sheep, not metaphorically, but literally. They recorded lambs, debts, weights, and destinies, all in little clay slips, cocooned beneath temple domes. The bedtime beauty of it all is this. Before banks had floor-to-ceiling marble and rotating doors, they had incense and mathematic monks in sandals. And speaking of rotating, gently close your eyes and let the next ancient idea turn softly toward us, where the clink of real coins begins to echo faintly in the air. Chapter 14. The minty fresh smell of empire. Here we find ourselves, dear dreamer, somewhere between the golden dust of ancient roads and the clink of freshly forged ambitions. Tonight, we're meandering into one of history's more peculiar obsessions, the glorious gleam of metal you could spend. Ah, yes, the age of coins, conquest, and emperors with increasingly suspicious hairstyles. The story of minted money truly shimmered into form in the ancient city of Lydia. Yes, the same Lydia, where they somehow managed to make riverbanks both poetic and profitable. Around 600 BCE, King Aliates, or perhaps his son Croesus, depending on who had the shinier memory, decided that clumps of random metal weren't ultimately the classiest way to keep a kingdom running. So what did they do? They minted coins, real coins, uniform little discs of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, plucked from the river Pactolus, perhaps by very polite fishermen with very deep pockets. Each coin was stamped with the royal seal. No, not the kind that claps its fins and balances balls on its nose, but rather a lion's head. Because nothing says we mean business quite like a bitey feline emblazoned on your currency. The coin, dear listener, was a marvel. It was portable, durable, and mildly jingled when you walked, offering a pleasant soundtrack to your economic activity. Trade became easier, markets flourished, and for the first time, people could hold value in their palm without it going off, spoiling, or needing to be watered. Lydia's monetary sparkle didn't go unnoticed. As is often the case with good ideas and shiny things, it was copied. The Persians, not to be outshimmered, created the daric, a glorious gold coin featuring the king himself, holding a spear and looking every inch like a man who definitely charged extra for postage. The daric spread across the Persian Empire faster than essential oils at a Renaissance fair, becoming one of the ancient world's most standardized currencies. Meanwhile, way over in a boot-shaped peninsula, a rising star Rome was still trading in lumps of bronze the size of a robust sandwich. It took the Romans a little while to refine their monetary style. At first, they used the aes rude, which is Latin for rude bronze. And it was, really, unrefined, heavy, and barely polite. The aes rude was an economic tool in the same way a well-flung rock could be considered a dancing partner, serviceable, but likely to cause confusion. Eventually, the Romans graduated to the aes grave, big, round bronze coins, often featuring animals, gods, and very stern owls. They minted coins not just for trade, but also for propaganda, which, in fairness, is simply the historical term for humble brag. Emperors minted their own faces into metal discs and flung them across the empire, ensuring that even if you hadn't seen the emperor in person, you'd at least seen his rather heroic nose wherever coins changed hands. But it wasn't all lions and laurels. Counterfeiting, that noble human tradition of mischief, was right behind. Some savvy fraudsters figured out that if you shaved the edges of a coin, just a teensy bit here and there, and melted down the trimmings, you could get free metal. Enough coin shavings and voila, you had an afternoon hobby and an arrest record. To combat this, clever mints introduced ridged edges, a little design flourish still present on many modern coins, and one that virtually no one notices anymore. Like a historical whisper in your pocket, a reminder that even centuries ago, money needed a bit of a security system beyond just a grumpy market guard with a clipboard. Minting coins became an act of power, a message from the state that said, "We control the currency, and also, look at our emperor's cheekbones." Coins served not just as money, but as tools of identity and trust. If you could hold a kingdom in your hand, you'd probably be more likely to believe in it. And so, as minted coins traveled from palace to peasant, from agora to alleyway, money began to sound different. It wasn't the bleating of bartered sheep anymore, but the reassuring, metallic clink of an empire just getting started. Coins became almost like tiny syllables in the language of civilization, each stamped, circulated, and gently worn into memory. But every shiny thing must eventually be challenged by a shinier one. And as trade routes stretched into sands and spices, another marvel of monetary evolution waited in the wings, exotic and infinitely lettered. Let's gently drift now, across dunes of distance and time, toward the gleaming calligraphies of something far silkier. Chapter 15. Peppercorns, Silk, and Secret Handshakes, How Trade Routes Wore the Crown. By now, you've gently floated down the timeline of money's earliest imaginings, where goats were as good as gold and shiny stones made even the grumpiest Mesopotamian chuckle. But tonight, we voyage not just through time, but across the silken threads and dusty caravan trails of the ancient trade routes, where money got a taste for travel and a flair for the dramatic. Picture the world a couple thousand years ago. A globe not yet burdened by GPS or excessive email chains, but instead stitched together by winding roads, bobbing ships, and the occasional bewildered camel. Somewhere between China and Rome, spices were being whispered about like gossip, and silks shimmered in candlelight like secrets wrapped in fabric. Enter the Silk Road. Not a road in the modern sense, no gas stations, no snack stands offering questionable hot dogs, but rather a tangle of often dusty, sometimes snowy paths that linked empires like an unconscious doodle connecting imagination to impulse. It stretched roughly 4,000 miles from the bustling cities of the Han Dynasty to the markets of the Mediterranean. And on those roads rode dreamers, merchants, monks, and more than a few very tired donkeys. The Silk Road wasn't so much about silk as it was about everything. Pepper, jade, gunpowder, musical instruments, languages, ideas, diseases. Yes, those too. And perhaps most importantly for our story, currencies. Picture a weary merchant carrying a bolt of golden silk in one hand and, aha, a little leather pouch full of coins in the other. But were the coins gold? Not always. Bronze, silver, sometimes copper, sometimes no coins at all. just slabs of tea pressed into bricks like cosmic granola, used as money in Tibet for centuries. Before anyone put stock in stocks, they put stock in, well, tea leaves. In fact, all along these routes, money wore many hats and travelled under many guises. In Central Asia, it literally changed faces, with coins often bearing portraits of different emperors depending on where you were standing. Each mustachioed ruler more regal than the last. Coins minted in India found themselves clinking in Roman pockets. Roman glass turned up in Chinese tombs. Everyone seemed content swapping obsessions, like old friends trading lunch snacks at school. But barter didn't disappear overnight. It lingered like a polite guest, awkward but tolerated. Even as coinage shuffled its way into the traveller's satchel, people still clung to tried and true exchanges. A Persian trader might offer cloth in return for Arabian incense, no coins involved. The deal simply sealed with a knowing nod and a firm handshake, possibly the world's first informal contract. Now, imagine the havens of these merchants, the caravanserai, roadside inns that punctuated the grueling journey every 20 miles or so, just long enough for a meal, a nap, and perhaps a small existential crisis. Within their low stone walls, stories were traded with as much value as goods. A coin passed hands, and with it, so did tales of distant empires, fantastical beasts, and rainfall techniques of the Babylonians. Money wasn't just changing how things moved, it was changing what people believed was possible. And then, of course, was the matter of spice. If money smelled like anything during this era, it would be cardamom, cinnamon, and the purple punch of cloves. These dried bits of flavour made their way westward from the Maluku Islands, the so-called Spice Islands, which might as well have been made of powdered moonlight for how prized they were. In parts of medieval Europe, a few grams of black pepper could buy you a cow. An entire sack might land you a manor, or at the very least, a suspiciously optimistic goat. This leads us gently to an oddly wonderful consequence of such trade. Money itself started to become more transferable, more standard, though not quite standardized. The gleaming promise of coinage had to reckon with the slower, moodier process of acceptance. A Roman coin might get accepted in a Persian stall, but only if the stall owner's cousin's uncle had seen one before and gave it the nod of approval. Thus was born the quiet art of trust in economics, long before blockchain claimed it had invented the concept. So here, nestled somewhere between saffron dreams and desert wind, money began to act not only as a medium, but as an idea. One that could leap cultures and continents, praised in Sanskrit, hummed about in Greek, and haggled over in Aramaic. And as we leave the slow swing of camels and the warm glow of desert firelight, the road hums on. For while trade connected the corners of every ancient empire, soon empires themselves would rise or fall based not just on gold, but on clever little ways of managing it. But we'll let that story slowly unfold, like a coin rolling over the edge of a worn wooden table, while you slip deeper into silence. Chapter 16. The Grand Return of Coinage. Rome polishes its pennies. Now we drift quietly into the heart of a city, where togas once rustled in the Mediterranean breeze, and sandals slapped softly against marble floors. Ancient Rome, where the fountains gurgled sweet thoughts and the empire tackled financial systems with all the drama of a soap opera, but with fewer advertisements for hair tonics. Rome, ever the ambitious overachiever, wasn't content to let the Greeks and their coinage innovations shine alone. No, the Romans saw money not just as a means of exchange, but as a marvelous opportunity for branding. For why trade with a blank disc of metal when you can have a little portrait of Caesar smirking back at you? It began humbly, as grand things often do. In the early Republic, the Romans used unwieldy lumps of bronze called ies rude, which frankly were about as convenient in one's purse as a potato in a pocket. These brutish bars weren't even pretty. They were just hefty objects you'd slap on a scale like a butcher weighing ham. Commerce was less sprightly, more buffet-style weightlifting. But Rome, practical and proud, soon realized that they could improve upon this clunky system. Thus was born the es signatum. Essentially, bronze plates stamped with official symbols, animals, gods, and occasionally things that looked like they were sketched by someone's particularly tired uncle. Still, it was a step in the right direction. Yet even the res signatum had its limitations. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a 5-pound decorative bronze sheet. The baker would need a wheelbarrow and some strong opinions about ergonomics. So by the 3rd century BCE, the Romans introduced a more manageable solution: actual coins, round and ready to jingle. The earliest Roman coins were the ades awel eyes grave, which roughly translates to heavy bronze. And yes, they were both. Slightly more elegant than their predecessor, but still chunky enough that you wouldn't want too many in your tunic pocket. These coins featured images of gods Mercury, Roma, and other celestial VIPs, probably to lend a bit of cosmic legitimacy to your afternoon apple purchase. But real coin royalty emerged when the Romans adopted silver and later on gold into their currency parade. The denarius, a silver coin introduced around 211 BCE, became the backbone of Roman commerce. Its name meant containing 10, as it was originally worth 10 bronze coins, until inflation did what inflation loves to do and turned mathematical certainty into fiction. Eventually, the denarius would be devalued more times than a late-night pizza coupon. The coin designs grew ever fancier through the Republic and into the Empire. During the reign of Julius Caesar, coins became a bulletin board of presidential flair. For the first time, Caesar plopped his own face right onto coins while he was still very much alive. A bold move that said, in case you weren't sure who's in charge, look again. This practice caught on like a fashion trend with emperors, and for centuries, Roman coins would function as pocket-sized public relations campaigns, complete with impressively chiseled jawlines and deeply regal noses. Coins crossed borders, were hoarded under mattresses woven from hay, and mingled in marketplaces filled with garlic, grapes, and gossip. They were counted on stone counters by merchants who knew every curve of the sesterce and every shimmer of the aureus. Rome, in its writhing complexity, made money the lifeblood of its vast, bustling civilization. But perhaps most subtly poetic of all was the way Roman coins endured. Long after emperors turned to ash and marble buildings to pigeons' playgrounds, Roman coins kept showing up in farmers' fields and museum drawers, whispering soft metallic tales of empires, trade, and the strangely sleep-inducing history of money. It's curious, for all the thunder of legionary boots and the rhetoric of senators with dramatic hand gestures, the real Rome lived in the tiny echoes of its daily transactions. The passing of coins from palm to palm, the quiet bargain for bread, the jingle of copper behind a curtain. And isn't that a soothing thought? That the great machine of empire could be felt most deeply in the weight of a coin in the crook of your fingers, warm from another's touch, worn smooth from centuries of sleepy commerce. Let's rest a moment in that image, shall we? Beneath the olive trees, gold catching the fading sun, Coins murmuring stories of old emperors who dreamed of order and yet couldn't resist a nice profile engraving. And as the stars blinked to life over the 7 hills of Rome, we prepare to wander further still, into darker times and dimmer coins, where empires forget their old value and new ones rise on promises of replacement. Chapter 17: Paper Promises and the Whispering Winds of China. Ah, paper, so delicate, so crinkle-prone, so delightfully flammable. One might not expect such a frail little invention to change the very essence of money itself. But let us drift, ever so gently, into 7th century China, where some very clever officials were about to replace jingling metal with the quiet rustle of printed trust. Now, picture medieval China, the Silk Road breathing spice-scented stories into the wind, merchants sipping tea beside camel caravans, and emperors with silkier pajamas than your softest pillowcase. To navigate the growing complexity of long-distance trade, these merchants were dealing with a problem that keeps coming up in this sleepy tale of money: lots and lots of heavy coins. Imagine trying to buy a large shipment of fine porcelain bowls using nothing but copper cash. You'd either need a small army to carry it or a very cooperative set of donkeys. Either way, the logistics were not dreamy. Enter the jiaozi. No, not the dumpling. Though we'd forgive you for getting hungry at the thought, the jiaozi we're referring to was one of the world's earliest forms of paper currency, which began floating around like a soft breeze in Sichuan province during the Tang dynasty. And floating is a good word for it. Paper money didn't clink or weigh down your robes, and it couldn't double as a weapon during tense haggling disputes. It was money in its most feather-light form, a promissory note, an "I owe you" written down and trusted by everyone involved. At first, the jiaozi was privately issued by merchants themselves. They were receipts, really. Little proof slips verifying that somewhere safe your coins were stored and you could redeem them elsewhere if needed. It's rather like leaving your goldfish with a friend, receiving a polite letter thanking you for the fish, and being assured you can get them back later, assuming your friend didn't replace them with noticeably more floating fish. But as these paper notes began fluttering around more often, the Chinese government, never one to miss a good opportunity for bureaucracy, stepped in like a sleepwalky panda in a silk robe. By the 11th century, the Song dynasty turned these private slips into officially sanctioned currency. The government began printing their own paper money, possibly with the world's most tasteful woodblock printing skills. The invention of true fiscal trust on tree pulp had begun. Now, woodblock printing was no small feat. It involved carving entire scripts into wood in reverse and then stamping ink onto enormous sheets of fiber-rich paper. Honestly, the process was about as relaxing as wallpapering your grandmother's library, but with more calligraphy and fewer biscuits. But what truly marked this money as special wasn't just the ink or effort. It was the extraordinary leap of belief. Because paper, as you may have noticed, has no inherent value. You can't build a hut with it. You can't throw it into battle. And it won't grow into a money tree no matter how many holes you poke in it. Yet people believed in it. That belief, it turns out, is what made it work. The Song government backed their paper with treasures, issuing notes that declared, quite calmly, this piece of paper is worth so and so many strings of coins. The people accepted this because, well, walking around with a feather-light scroll tucked into your belt was simply more elegant than sweating under sacks of coinage. And so, like a breeze brushing across a bamboo forest, the idea of money began to shift, from things you can hold and clang to ideas you could imagine and trust. Of course, not everything was dreams and mooncakes. Inflation crept in like a suspicious cat. The temptation to print more and more of these soft promises became too great a habit, and as more ink was brushed across paper, the less each one was worth. Trust, like rice porridge, must be handled with care. Still, the concept stuck, and it floated westward slowly, like the scent of tea through mountain mist. Other empires would eventually pick up on the idea, though with varying degrees of, shall we say, financial finesse. But tonight, let your lids grow heavy on the thought of those early Chinese traders, trading whispers for silk, trust for paper, and weighty worries for lightweight wonder. And as the ink dries and the fires burn low in imperial hearths, we'll drift next into a land of gold leaf and Leonardo, a place where art, banks, and a few very dramatic Italians will stir the gold-dusted next chapter of money's sleepy tale. Chapter 18 of Medieval Minting and Royal Meltdowns. Somewhere between a knight tightening his belt after a feast of questionable stew and a monk carefully illuminating a single golden letter for 17 hours straight, money in the Middle Ages took on a curious new form. Coins, those clinky little crowns of commerce, began to evolve, shimmering in the candlelight of castles, crossing deserts tucked in leather pouches, and sometimes, embarrassingly, being swallowed by goats. Our story tonight nestles itself in the medieval world, where money-making wasn't a metaphor, but often involved literal melting. You see, through much of the Middle Ages, minting money wasn't just a job for bearded craftsmen with soot-stained fingers. It was an act of royal authority. Coins were effectively tiny metallic selfies of monarchs. And if you didn't like the way your king looked on your change, well, perhaps don't say it out loud near the gallows. Kings and queens tightly controlled coinage. Monarchs, such as England's Henry II, insisted on uniform coins throughout their domains, partly because they were control enthusiasts, and partly because it made buying more swords significantly easier. Before that, every local lord could mint his own money. Imagine going from one village to another, and suddenly your money is as valuable as a damp carrot. Not ideal for commerce or carrot farmers. Minting, in those days, was less about economic policy and more about metallurgy and muscle. Coins were made by hand. First, silver or gold was heated until nicely melted, like fondue you could conquer with. Then it was poured into molds, hammered flat, and finally stamped with the royal image by a man wielding a hammer with less accuracy than grace. Medieval coin makers were known as moneyers, which is fun to say, and even more fun at cocktail parties, if you're the sort of person who attends 12th century cocktail parties, though back then we called them feasting halls and nobody served olives. But here's where it gets snoozily spicy. Not all coins were what they seemed. Silver was the currency champ, especially around Europe, but people being people, enterprising, sleepy, and occasionally dodgy, often shaved a little off the coin's edge. These shavings could be melted down later and used to make entirely new coins. It was like photocopying currency, if photocopying required a small smelting operation in your mum's basement. To combat this, some clever mints started designing coins with intricate edges or little dots around the rim, impossible to replicate once shaved. These clever bits of design were the anti-counterfeiting tech of the 13th century, and wildly successful, until the counterfeiters got cleverer. It's a tale as old as money. You invent something smart, and someone smarter invents something sneaky. Of course, not all money drama remained in the realm of coins. In the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy, Roman, nor particularly unified, Over 500 different mints were producing coins by the late Middle Ages. A merchant's purse jingled like a bag of pebbles from 17 completely different beaches. Each coin accepted or rejected based on the whimsy of local shops or the constable's mood that day. So travellers often had to weigh coins on tiny pocket scales. Imagine stopping at an inn and whipping out your travel balance when asked to pay for your barley soup and roasted parsnips. "Oh no, good sir," says the innkeeper with a dramatic sigh. "Your silver kreuzer is a gram light and smells vaguely of turnips." And just like that, no dinner for you. Speaking of silver dramas, let us not forget the Great Debasement. In England, during the 16th century, but let's not rush there. We're still strolling through the medieval mists. Rulers often decided to dilute the purity of silver coins to stretch the supply. A little less silver, a little more base metal, and voila, more money, fewer scruples. It was the fiscal equivalent of filling wine bottles with water and hoping no one notices until the third glass. But the common folk weren't fools, not all the time, and they soon caught on. Trust in coins began to waver. Merchants harumphed. Bakers demanded more payment. And so, a quiet revolution began to stir. People started to want a money system that didn't constantly betray their bread budgets. The seeds of financial reform were gently, grumpily planted. As the medieval sun sets on this clanking, molten era of metal and monarchs, we begin to see the glimmer of something new. Notes. Not love notes, though there were plenty of those, but paper money, waiting in the wings, crinkling softly with promise. Let's drift gently toward that curious innovation in the next cozy chapter. Chapter 19. The kingdoms, the coins, and the kings who couldn't stop making faces. As moonlight drapes over ancient battlements and the golden clink of coins echoes through memory's fog, we find ourselves drifting into the dreamy world of medieval Europe. A place where everyone was kind of broke. Fashion was mostly chainmail. And monarchs had a curious obsession with stamping their own faces on tiny discs of metal. Now, sleepy traveller, before your mind begins to wander toward dragon-slaying knights and damsels who somehow all owned castles, let's focus our gaze on a quieter miracle, the slow, deliberate minting of medieval money. When the Roman Empire went poof, not all at once of course, more like a long and awkward goodbye, its once shimmering economy turned into a bit of a coinless karaoke party. Local rulers, dukes, barons, and even moderately ambitious shepherds found themselves saying, "Wait, who's in charge of the money now?" Spoiler alert, they all decided it was them. The early Middle Ages, sometimes unfairly called the Dark Ages, because people seem to get cranky when they forget how to build aqueducts, was a time when money meant many things and consistency was, shall we say, optional. Gold coins, rare. Silver, popular but constantly messed with. Cow-shaped tokens of value, surprisingly common. Still, rulers loved coins. They loved coins almost as much as they loved velvet capes and loud proclamations. And not for some noble economic reason either. Oh no. They liked coins because they could put their face on them. That's right. The medieval coin was the royal selfie, just shinier and issued in limited supply. Each tiny piece of silver didn't just say, "I'm worth something." It said, "This is King Harold. He's got a thick beard and a strong neck. You should take him seriously." Never mind if the real King Harold had one squinty eye and a mole shaped like Sardinia. Once it was stamped in silver, that strong-jawed royal profile became fact. Noble, but heavily idealized. The minting process itself was a sleepy little affair. Armies of skilled artisans hunched under torchlight, heating bits of metal and hitting them very hard with a carved hammer. There were no factories, no assembly lines, just hard-working humans with tired arms and smudged fingers, carefully creating what would become tomorrow's bag of silver pennies, or more likely, one very shiny penny that you'd guard like a squirrel with seasonal anxiety. And then there were rules about who could mint money. You see, kings didn't like other people getting carried away with currency. It made them nervous. The monopoly on minting was like having exclusive rights to the kingdom's gossip. It gave you power. But naturally, everyone broke the rules. Imagine a medieval England where some bishop in the north decides, you know what, I deserve a coin too. And so he does. And suddenly, you have two heads on coins and a whole lot of ordinary people wondering, whose face is legal tender this week? Monarchs attempted to centralize minting, and some truly went for it. Charlemagne the Great, big fan of big ideas, issued coins that proudly declared his Latin titles and ambitions of uniting Christendom under one, well, shiny currency. Was it elegant? Sort of. Was it confusing? Also yes, since many people couldn't read Latin, or read at all. But that wasn't the coin's fault. By the 12th century, more standardized systems began to circulate like sleepy ripples in a silver pond. Governments started regulating coin weights. They began creating designated mints. In England, for example, various towns had official mints, quite literally stamping out the competition. If you were a coin in medieval Winchester, you had a proper little birth certificate and everything. Still, one of the quirks of medieval money was its lifespan. Coins were constantly clipped. Imagine someone sneakily snipping the edges of your coins with little scissors, enough to gradually shave off value, like giving your money a very slow haircut. People did this because silver had, well, silver in it, and silver was shiny and shareable. Eventually, kings would call in all the old coins and do something called a recoinage, which is a fancy word for let's start over, but with less snipping this time. So whether stamped with a noble brow or trimmed like a hedgerow, a medieval coin was more than payment. It was poetry in metal, propaganda in your pocket, and quite possibly the most glamorous way to say, don't forget who's in charge. And now, as the last bell tolls across an ancient stone village, we yawn in the company of kings and coin makers, and prepare to gently tiptoe toward a warmer place in history, where empires met exotic trade winds and spices were somehow a form of currency. Chapter 20. The Bankers of Renaissance Dreams. By the late Middle Ages, money wasn't just clinking in purses and hiding under mattresses, it was graduating. Slowly, cautiously, and with an air of faint self-importance, it was putting on its Renaissance breeches and preparing to study Latin. Because, dear sleepy time traveller, we have arrived in Florence, cradle of art, science, and, most thrilling of all, banking. Yes, I know. Excitement may be bubbling inside you like a cappuccino on a gentle simmer. But breathe deeply, let your shoulders go heavy, and let's wander slowly through the marble-lined corridors of financial invention, where the Medici family shows us how money could wear a toga and a velvet robe at the same time. Now, long before banking was a fluorescent lit maze of acronyms and implausibly loud keyboards, it was a deeply personal affair. Wealthy merchants in 15th century Florence often loaned money the same way one might lend a neighbor a cup of sugar, if that sugar came with interest and political consequences. This is where the Medici come in. Yes, the Medici. A family so wealthy and influential, they managed to fund popes, tiptoe around excommunication, and commission enough art to fill your dreams for a week. But beneath the frescoes and flowing robes was a ledger, a very well-organized ledger. Giovanni di Bici de' Medici, the patriarch with a flair for frugality and excellent accounting, founded the Medici Bank in 1397. It wasn't the first bank, but it was, in many ways, the first bank as we would recognize it. Elegant, efficient, and not above creative bookkeeping when necessary. The Medici figured out something quite clever. Instead of lugging sacks of coin with you as you tottered around Europe, a method prone to bandits and sore shoulders, one could deposit money in Florence and draw it out in Milan. It was like magic, or rather, it was the birth of the letter of credit, one of money's many daydreams made real. This financial innovation changed everything. Suddenly, money didn't have to exist in physical form to do its work. A slip of paper signed with an elegant flourish was often more valuable than silver coins. The Renaissance banker, quill behind ear and modestly smug expression in place, was quietly teaching the world that value wasn't always visible. Meanwhile, the church maintained a complicated relationship with banking. Charging interest on loans, or usury as it was known, was considered sinful. But loopholes are older than morality itself, and clever bankers and determined popes often sidled around the sin by calling interest fees or gifts of gratitude. Some even held their breath and lent money to God's representatives on very favorable, miraculously favorable terms. It was a time when money and morality napped fitfully together in the same bed. On Saturdays, you'd buy indulgences for your sins, and on Mondays, you paid back your business loan with a slight moral itch behind the ear. But this cognitive dissonance paved the way for modern finance, because when enough people agreed to look the other way while quietly reinventing morality, you'd be surprised how fast capital can blossom. Let us not forget the aesthetics. Renaissance bankers had flair. Their halls were frescoed, their robes heavy, their rings large. Banking was no longer a grubby backroom affair. It had gone full theatrical. And yet, at its core, it remained a symphony of deposits, credits, risks, and dreams. Florentine banks gave rise, quite literally, to the concept of credit itself. Trust in potential, belief in repayment, and confidence in the future. A rather optimistic notion when you think about it, which, in the soft quiet of this chapter, we can think about very slowly indeed. The Medici Bank expanded across Europe, establishing branches from Bruges to London. Each branch was a beacon of the idea that money could move invisibly, guided only by ledgers and trust. Letters were carried by hand, accounts kept across borders, and for a brief, twinkling moment, finance looked like a form of delicate diplomacy. But things, as they always do, grew complicated. The Medici Bank eventually fell victim to poor management and overly ambitious loans. It turns out even genius accountants can be undone by an awkward cousin running the London office. That's the trouble with Renaissance nepotism. It paints beautifully, but calculates terribly. Still, from the slow collapse of the Medici Empire would rise something even more powerful, a sense that money itself was a network, not a stack, and like a spider's web, invisible but strong. It could catch dreams, debts, and destiny in mid-air. Which brings us, with a sigh as soft as silk, to the next chapter. Let's follow that whisper of currency into the age of empires, where money takes to the seas and doesn't always come back. Chapter 21. The curious case of coffeehouse capitalism. Picture, if you will, a London morning sometime round about the late 1600s. The air smells faintly of soot and potential, the streets bustling with merchants and mischief. a chill clings to the cobblestones, but in one magical, steamy place, business boils. Welcome, dear sleeper, to the English coffee house, where the caffeine is hot, the wigs are powdered, and the future of finance is being scribbled hastily on spare parchment. We owe a strangely sleepy debt to these caffeinated hubs of verbal chaos. While we often imagine the birth of modern markets in marble halls by men with strong brows and stiffer neckties, much of it happened between sips of slightly burned coffee and bites of questionable pastries. You see, by the time the 17th century rolled around, London was brimming with ideas, some good ones, like fire insurance, some less great, like wigs made from the hair of suspiciously quiet horses. But among the best ideas to bounce off walls gilded with pipe smoke and overexcited debate was the notion that commerce could be centralized through a new, delightful coffee-scented invention, the stock exchange. Now, imagine a place called Jonathan's Coffee House, about as stylish as your great-uncle's parlour and twice as noisy. It became known as the unofficial headquarters for merchants, brokers, and anybody else with an opinion and a proclivity for risk. Rather than pass notes beneath marble statues, traders stood elbow to elbow, hovering like slightly overdressed seagulls over lists of ship arrivals, commodity prices, and rumours about Dutch tulip farms. Here, in the buzz and burble of chatter, the idea of shares, little slices of a business that could be bought, sold, or quietly regretted, found fertile ground. Stock trading was not born from quiet deliberation, but from loud, frothy argument and the occasional spilled drink. Let's not forget a rather questionable tale, the South Sea bubble. Picture it as the world's earliest case of financial FOMO, fear of missing out for the blissfully uninitiated. Investors, swept up in a haze of speculation, poured money into the South Sea Company, which promised wealth beyond dreams, and then quietly delivered very little beyond paper losses and public embarrassment. At its peak, shares were bought with giddy optimism. At its trough, they were treated as expensive bookmarks in ledgers best left unopened. But this wasn't just a British drama. Across the Channel, the French had their own swirls of speculative energy, led by a man named John Law. Yes, Law. His parents clearly had a sense of irony. A gambler, economist, and all-around charmer, Law convinced the French crown to let him create a national bank that printed paper money, a revolutionary idea at the time, and one that eventually collapsed under the weight of too much enthusiasm and not enough math. Still, these experiments, forward-looking, flawed, and often fueled by steamy beverages, shaped the way money moved and multiplied. Something new was happening. People were no longer just saving coins in dusty socks or hoarding gold under mattresses made of straw and sweaty regret. Instead, they were investing, taking chances, participating in a market that reflected not just what they had, but what they hoped would be. And just as important as the markets themselves were the people within them. Printers who produced newspapers whispering of market shifts. Couriers who dashed through rainy streets with urgent messages. The ever-watchful scribes with inky fingers and perceptive eyes. The age of passive wealth was waving goodbye, replaced by one of frantic speculation, boundless optimism, and coffee that tasted like courage. It's rather soothing, in a strange way, to think that the great engines of capitalism were nursed not in boardrooms or on battlefields, but amidst the clink of spoons against ceramic mugs. The steam that floated upward from fruity Ethiopian beans was the same that fogged up the spectacles of men dreaming of empires not built from brick, but belief. And while the noise of those coffee houses surely kept a few contemplative patrons awake. They were laying the foundations for a financial future that would ripple into every crevice of modern life, from retirement funds to impulse purchases of decorative garden flamingos. So, as your thoughts steep like a fine evening brew, let your mind drift from the clatter of coffee cups to the golden flicker of candlelight on ledgers. Gentle snores may have echoed through the shadows, side by side with the first murmurs of the global market, stretching its newborn limbs. Next, we gently saunter into a world where a note meant more than just a melody, and promises were printed on paper not backed by gold, but by trust alone. Chapter 22. Notes, Napkins, and the Paper Money Puzzle. So, here you are again, drifting through the annals of money like a drowsy coin in a slow river. Tonight, we gently unfold one of the crinkliest chapters in the story of Moolah, the invention of paper money. Yes, that noble, fluttery rectangle, perfumed with a hint of coffee, wallet leather, and economic ambition. Prepare for some of the softest drama in fiscal history, long before your favorite vending machine accepted your wrinkled dollar and betrayed you by keeping both snack and change. The very idea of using paper as a symbol of value would have seemed, frankly, bonkers. To early humans who scraped copper, weighed silver, and hoarded shiny discs under mattresses made of straw, offering someone a piece of paper in exchange for actual goods would have ranked somewhere between mild sorcery and poorly thought out pranks. But over in ancient China, circa 7th century Tang dynasty, an idea was born. Merchants were tired. Their donkey carts sagged beneath the weight of thick metal coins. Their wallets were less pocket-sized and more small anvil-sized. So a few clever traders began issuing promissory notes as stand-ins for the cumbersome coins. These were private IOUs, not yet official money, mind you, more like trust exercises scribbled on parchment. You'd hand over the note, and the merchant promised it was as good as gold, or at least heavy round things with square holes. These became so popular, the government took notice. As governments tend to do when people start printing value without permission. So by the Song dynasty in the 11th century, the state said, let's make it official. Just like that, government-issued jiaozi was born, the world's first official paper currency. It was layered, stamped, and secured with a kind of bureaucratic flourish that would make even modern DMV paperwork blush. The benefits were immediate and dreamy. Coins were heavy. Paper was floaty. It fluttered through markets, passed from perfume hand to sticky hand, across silks and spices and tax stands. And just like that, money became less of a thing and more of an idea. Imagine an old Chinese city, lanterns bobbing like sleepy fireflies, a tea merchant gently folding change into a customer's hand. The money is paper now. It flies, it folds. You could tuck it under your pillow or fold it into an origami goat if your bills were small and your insomnia particularly artisan. Europe, meanwhile, trundled several centuries behind like a bearded uncle who's just discovered email. When Marco Polo visited China in the 13th century, he was amazed, amused, and probably a bit confused by this paper money phenomenon. He wrote about it in tones both impressed and slightly distressed. They use what to pay for bread. Imagine discovering that a napkin doodle can buy you a horse. That's how European minds processed paper money. The idea slowly tiptoed west, wrapped in skepticism and silk. Sweden was the first European country to attempt it officially in the 17th century. Their copper coins were so ludicrously large, you could smelt them into bathtubs, so paper began to look appealing. The Stockholm's Banco tried it. But like many bold first attempts, they went bankrupt. Turns out early banking was sort of like tightrope walking. In the fog, during an earthquake. Elsewhere, other nations gave it a whirl. The Bank of England began issuing notes that could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold, with soothing handwriting and exactly the kind of script that says, "We are in charge. Please don't panic." And slowly, the public agreed. Paper could be trustworthy, not because it was valuable in and of itself, but because people believed it was. Belief. That's the pillow under the head of modern money. Faith in systems, in banks, in the idea that tomorrow, this little rectangle will still mean something. That, and some very persuasive signatures. So tonight, as you snuggle under your blanket fortress, think of the journey from clunky bronze coin to wispy printed promise. From thick market weights to light jubilation in pockets everywhere. Money, formerly a thing with heft, had now taken its first fluttery flight into abstraction. And in our next gentle step, we'll watch it go intangible altogether. Into digits, into plastic, into clouds and cards and cheerful beeps. But for now, rest your thoughts like a folded note in an old cash register drawer, peacefully closed for the night. Chapter 23, The Paper Trail to Riches. By now, dear listener, you're nestled so comfortably in your cozy cocoon of sheets and pillows that even a herd of very polite Mongolian horses couldn't rouse you. Good. Because this next part of our old tale drifts into the delicate crinkle of parchment, ink, and promises. The kind of magic that turned bulky coin purses into gentle folds of paper. Tonight, we dream about the curious rise of paper money. Once upon a quieter time in the forests of ancient China, around the Tang dynasty, if your calendar stretches all the way back to the 7th century, merchants were slowly realizing that lugging around sacks of copper coins made trade sessions feel a tad too much like strength training. Those early Chinese coins were perfectly respectable. Hole in the middle, tied on a string, sort of like ye old wallet on a necklace. But delightful as they were, they clanked like wind chimes in a thunderstorm. So, some clever merchants began issuing promissory notes, pieces of parchment which politely said, "The person carrying this awkwardly thin piece of tree owes me like a bunch of coins." And because society runs best on collective faith and mild laziness, people agreed to accept these notes. A sigh of collective relief was heard across the empire. No more jingle-jangle coin ballet. Soon enough, by the time the Song dynasty twinkled into existence in the 10th century, these slips of practicality had caught the emperor's attention. The imperial government, always keen to monetize and centralize anything that vaguely resembled efficiency, decided to issue its own state-sponsored money. And so, with all the pomp and none of the drama, official paper money waddled onto the world stage. China called it jiaozi, not to be confused with dumplings, though both are equally delightful in their own ways. These little bills had government seals, expiration dates, yes really, and warned sternly against counterfeiting, which, not surprisingly, only inspired many to try. And here's where things get curiouser and cosier. No one else would really take the idea seriously for quite some time. It was as if the rest of the world just looked at China's innovation and said, interesting, before going back to burying gold under beds and trading goats for swords. It wasn't until several hundred sleepy years later that the paper bug caught on in Europe. By that time, Marco Polo had returned from his visit to the East with tales of magical bills that brought you silk, tea, and trouble. Europeans listened, nodded skeptically, and said, "Neat," before overanalyzing the whole idea for another few centuries. But banks, those endlessly curious institutions with a fondness for ledgers and long size, eventually saw the potential. In Stockholm, Sweden, around 1661, the first official European banknotes were issued by Stockholm's Banco. They were lovely, but the bank did miscalculate just how many to print, a common plague in the age of newly discovered enthusiasm. The bank collapsed under the weight of its own papery promises, which is precisely why trust is important when your money can go up in smoke, or rather pulp. Still, the idea spread, like candlelight on silk, slowly, cautiously, with the same nervous excitement as someone using their new quill pen for the first time. By the 18th century, England's Bank of England had gotten the hang of it. Other countries followed suit. Governments began issuing bills instead of coins. It was a revolution of fluff, money without weight, without jingle, but somehow not without substance. All backed not by actual treasure chests brimming with gold doubloons, but by trust, law, and something economists like to call just go with it. What's most charming, perhaps, is how people adapted their sense of value to suit this new idea. Paper, which once lived its humble life as wrapping for fish or lining for shoes, was now royalty, crisp and official, whispering promises of wealth from inside velvet pockets and biscuit tins. Of course, the paper itself evolved. Security threads were added, along with watermarks, pastel portraits of revered leaders, and numbers so fancy they looked like they were embroidered instead of printed. The bills began to resemble tiny works of art, commissioned by bureaucrats with a flair for the dramatic. And so, dollars, pounds, rupees, and reals floated softly into the dreams of millions. Each one was a symbol, a story, a potion of power wrapped in linen fibers. And yet, the tale isn't quite over. For just as the world had finally learned to trust paper, the invisible whispers of digital promises began to flutter through the air. But let's not follow those fleeting digital fireflies just yet. First, take a breath deeper than a banker's ledger, and let your thoughts gently fold themselves like origami bills, resting on the gentle breeze of history's sigh. The next chapter awaits, where cash becomes code, and coins start silently disappearing. Chapter 24. The paper, the plastic, and the pixels. They say money makes the world go round, but by now, dearest dreamer, you've probably realized it's the long nap afterward that really keeps it spinning. And in this final chapter, gently wrapped like the last chocolate in the tin, we rest in the shadow of money's most curious forms. The soft rustle of paper, the smooth slide of plastic, and the ghostly glimmer of bits and bytes. As the sun set on the tangled thicket of coinage and clunky bartering, somewhere in ancient China, a civilization that had already invented umbrellas, kites, and probably bureaucratic inefficiency, someone had a nap-worthy idea. Why not let paper pretend to be gold? And so, during the Tang Dynasty, around the 7th century AD, merchants started to issue promissory notes, handwritten IOUs on paper, so that traders could avoid lugging around bulging bags of copper coins. These notes fluttered through markets like whispering moths, carrying the promise of value without the weight of metal. Eventually, under the Song Dynasty in the 11th century, these fluttery notes grew more official. The government stepped in and said with the quiet confidence of a napping tiger, "Yes, yes, we make the money now." Of course, Europe lagged behind, as it often did in matters of convenience. Medieval merchants still preferred silver jingles over slippery parchment. But by the time Marco Polo finished his 24-year Netflix-less gap year and returned from China clutching tales of paper currency, European minds were fizzing with disbelief and a faint humming of financial FOMO. It would still take a few centuries, naturally. Europe wasn't known for hurrying. Banks, like slightly paranoid hoarders with marble columns, took over the task of printing and backing paper money. The Bank of England printed its first note in 1694, charmingly handwritten, and easier to forge than a parent's signature on a field trip form. Over time, banknotes evolved into small official rectangles in Technicolor, bursting with monarchs, moustaches, and anti-counterfeit wizardry. By the 20th century, paper ruled supreme, crammed into wallets, clipped in register drawers, folded into origami tips with awkward admiration. But as always in history, just when people got comfortable, someone invented a better inconvenience. Enter the credit card. The plastic rectangle of, I deserve this now, and future me can sort it out later. The very first modern credit card emerged in the United States in 1950, not from a bank, but from a moment of mild embarrassment. Frank McNamara reportedly forgot his wallet during a dinner in New York and had to reach for a financial band-aid. Thus was born the Diners Club card, and with it, the age of invisible money began. Soon, plastic cards slid into our lives like suave secret agents. Debit, credit, loyalty, library. Swiping became a ritual. Punching a pin became a tiny act of trust. We built our empires on magnetic stripes and signature scribbles. And then, as technology whispered lullabies into silicon ears, money lost its physical form altogether. Into the cloud it went, dissolving like cotton candy in tea. Today, money lives in apps and algorithms, in things called blockchains and blinking QR codes. A virtual ocean of purchases now flows with no coins, no bills, just electric promises. Cryptocurrency sauntered in, cloaked in enigma, with Bitcoin leading the cryptic parade in 2009. Invented by someone, or possibly no one, named Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin offered a currency with no central bank, no paper trail, and no bedtime. Digital wallets swelled. Tap to pay replaced, "Do you take Visa?" And the soft chime of approval replaced the human smile of a cashier. Children now trade in virtual coins for digital dragon skins. And grown-ups invest real fortunes in things no one can touch. It is, in a way, the greatest bedtime story humans ever told themselves. This number on my screen means I can live. But for all its pixelated wizardry, money's heart has always been the same. A song of trust, woven between strangers. From cowrie shells to smartphones, economies have rested on the quiet agreement that a thing has worth because we say it does. And here, sweet dreamer, in the hush of moonlight and soft logarithms, this long, boring, wondrous tale floats to a close. You've traveled from the clink of ancient coins to the quiet buzz of digital transactions. You've wandered markets, palaces, banks, and blockchain mines. And now, with pockets full of sleepy facts and a vault full of dreamy chuckles, you may rest. Let the numbers sleep. Let the coins stay quiet. Let tomorrow's receipts sort themselves. You, dear listener, have earned your rest, and whatever wealth lies in dreams. Good night.